My stepdaughter made the varsity team and suddenly my husband had no time for me or my kids, so I put my foot down and said she had to quit. Now everyone says I'm evil and my husband is threatening to leave. I've been in my stepdaughter's life since she was 7. I never tried to replace her mom, never pushed myself into some bonus mom fantasy. Our relationship was always polite, distant, stable enough. She used to come over every other weekend, watch TV with her dad, hang around the kitchen while I cooked, but we never had some deep emotional bond. Honestly, that was fine. I wasn't trying to force something fake. My kids were younger and I was juggling work, school functions, the usual chaos, so I treated her like extended family kindness, boundaries, and space. My husband has always carried this heavy guilt about not being present enough during her early childhood. His ex used to mess with visitation, guilt trip him constantly, use their daughter to play tug of war with him. That dynamic never fully died, even after all these years. Anytime the girl hinted at being unhappy, he spiraled. Anytime she wanted something, he bent over backwards for it. I used to just let it go, because it wasn't destroying anything major. Annoying sometimes, yes, but manageable. Then she made varsity. And apparently, making varsity in our town is not just making varsity. It's like joining a cult. Suddenly her coach is demanding 6-day practices, Sundays for fundraising, travel out of state, hundreds of dollars in fees, mandatory parent volunteering, weekly team dinners, concession shifts, meetings, booster events. It was like her entire teenage life took over our whole household. My husband dove in like it was the Olympics. He acted like this was his moment to rewrite the past and win Father of the Century. He started spending hours at practices, meetings, fundraisers. He rearranged our finances without telling me. He used joint funds like it was monopoly money. He started missing my kids' events, even stuff he promised he'd be there for. He'd come home at 10 or 11 at night saying he lost track of time. He left chores, school pickups, bedtime routines, errands, everything to me. Meanwhile, I work too. I deal with 2 younger kids who actually live here full-time. I'm juggling their after-school activities, homework, dentist appointments, the whole thing. But because his daughter made varsity, I'm expected to carry the entire load? And if I dared to say anything, he acted like I was jealous or trying to hold her back. And here's the part that really hit me. Years ago, my oldest tried for a competitive team, and my husband shut it down because he said it was too demanding and would take away from family time. But now, suddenly the most important thing in the world is committing our entire lives to a sport that doesn't even belong to our household full-time. I brought up that double standard calmly, and he brushed it off like it didn't count. He said his daughter needed this more. That sentence kept looping in my head. My kids live with him full-time. They don't need equal attention. They don't deserve the same level of involvement. I think that was the moment I realized something was really off. It got to a point where our whole household was falling apart, so I said what needed to be said. She needed to switch to JV or pick something less demanding. Not because I disliked her. Not because I wanted her to fail. Because our home was collapsing under the weight of something that wasn't sustainable. He acted like I asked him to abandon his child, so my question is, am I overreacting here? Update 1. My husband decided the best way to prove I'm overreacting was to drag me into the school. He told me we were just going to clarify things, but he basically ambushed me with a meeting he had already scheduled with the varsity coach. I didn't even argue because at this point, I'm trying to keep my energy for things that actually matter, like our younger kids and my job. The coach acted like he was running a professional franchise instead of a high school team. He barely looked at me at first, just talked at me like he had this practice speech ready about dedication, commitment, and how varsity is a big opportunity for a young athlete's future. My husband kept nodding along like he was in church. I sat there listening to this grown man talk about concession stand duty and out-of-state tournaments, like it was some honor I should feel grateful to sacrifice my entire household for. The whole thing felt ridiculous. What bothered me most was how the coach kept hinting that families who struggle usually don't last long in varsity programs. He didn't say anything outright, but it was obvious he was implying the problem was me. My husband acted like this was some powerful moment that would open my eyes. Instead, I just felt tired. I told them both that I'm not reorganizing my life every single day to support a sport that honestly feels like a full-time job. The coach didn't like that answer. My husband didn't either. But I wasn't going to pretend I suddenly agreed with them just to make things easier in the moment. A few days later, things took a turn I didn't expect. My husband's ex showed up at my workplace completely unannounced. I haven't had many interactions with her over the years, mostly brief, polite exchanges during pickups and drop-offs. She was always civil enough, but distant. This time, though, she looked like she had been waiting for this moment. She started talking about how she knew I'd eventually show who I really was. She said she always suspected I resented her daughter. She even said she warned my husband years ago not to let me take over his attention. I guess she thought she was hitting some nerve, but I felt nothing. I just stood there thinking about how none of this made sense, because if I'd wanted to push my stepdaughter out, I had 100 chances over the years, and never did. I've kept my distance on purpose because I didn't want to overstep. Somehow she twisted that into malicious intent. Meanwhile, my husband has turned into some part-time house ghost. He comes home late, leaves early, and acts like he's living in two different worlds. He still expects me to keep things running like usual though, so I'm picking up the slack with the younger kids while also working full-time. When I tried to talk to him about how the schedule changes are affecting the kids, he brushed me off like it wasn't important. That was the moment something in me kind of shifted. You'd think he'd realize neglecting 2 children to chase after one is pretty messed up, but he's too wrapped up in wanting to make up for lost time to see anything clearly. Then he moved into the guest room out of nowhere, not because we had a fight. He said he needed space until I can support his daughter. It's strange how quickly someone's loyalty can flip when guilt is involved. He's so scared of losing his daughter that he's willing to lose his family in the process. The sad part is, he doesn't even see it happening. Update 2. I feel like every week something new is happening in this house, and none of it makes any actual sense anymore. The next big mess didn't even start with an argument. It started with a bill. I was going through the mail because he usually just stacks it somewhere random and pretends he'll handle it later. Buried under coupons and junk mail was an envelope from the Booster Club. I out loud wondered why they were mailing us anything. When I opened it, I saw the amount. $1,200. It was already charged. They thanked our family for committing to the season and listed all the things we agreed to cover. Travel, uniforms, a team fundraiser, something about a mandatory summer camp, volunteer hours. They even had a copy of the contract attached. At the bottom was my signature, except it wasn't mine, not even close. I don't know what snapped in me at that moment, but something did. It wasn't even anger at first. It was just this heavy feeling in my chest, like I was watching my husband turn into someone I didn't recognize. Someone careless, desperate, and weirdly obsessive over something that wasn't even our kid's dream, just his guilt he kept feeding like a stray animal. He came home late again that night, still wearing team colors like he was one of the players. I didn't bother confronting him because I already knew what he'd say. It would turn into him acting like I was sabotaging everything. So instead, I emailed the Booster Club president myself and said I never signed anything. She responded fast and said she understood, but the money was already allocated. The hours were assigned. She said next time my husband needed to make sure both parents agreed before signing. I just sat there staring at the screen, realizing this wasn't just him being overly involved. This was him rewriting the rules around me and calling it support. That whole week felt like he was living in a completely separate world. He kept telling me about practices and team group chats and how other parents admire his dedication. Meanwhile, I was the one picking up everything he dropped at home like some invisible assistant. I kept thinking, if he wants to act single and childless, he can start doing the laundry and dishes he keeps forgetting exist. A couple days later, I got a call from the school saying no one picked up my younger 2. My husband had texted earlier saying he'd handle it because he had a break in his schedule. Apparently the break didn't last long because he ended up at a team meeting that ran late. The school office kept them for almost an hour before they called me. I had to leave work in the middle of a shift, and my manager wasn't subtle about being annoyed. I got written up. I'm now one mistake away from another write-up, and I haven't had one in years. When we got home, my husband didn't even look ashamed. He tried to explain how the meeting was important and how he assumed I would get them if he couldn't. I just walked past him. I didn't trust myself to answer anything because I knew if I opened my mouth I wouldn't stop. The next morning, he woke up early to get ready for another team event. He said he didn't know what time he'd be back. He said it like it was normal. I told him calmly, because I didn't even have the energy to fight that. If he continued to wreck the whole household for a fantasy, he could leave it. He didn't respond. He just looked at me like I'd said something outrageous. Then he left. That's where things are now. Update 3. It started when the school counselor called me. I thought it was going to be something simple, maybe about the attendance issue from the other week or some scheduling problem. Instead, she told me she'd been concerned for a while about my stepdaughter's behavior. Apparently, she'd been falling behind in more than one class and missing assignments. And when teachers pulled her aside, she said things at home were tense because I was angry she made varsity. She also told people I was making her responsible for my younger kids, and that was why she had to skip the academic support sessions. I felt my stomach drop hearing that because none of that is true. I've never put childcare on her. I've barely asked her for anything at all these past couple months. She's the one who keeps inserting herself where she shouldn't, and I'm the one getting blamed for it. The counselor wasn't rude about it. She actually sounded confused, like she was trying to understand the real dynamic because the story she was getting wasn't lining up. I explained my side as calmly as I could. I told her I worked full-time. I handled all the house stuff myself lately because my husband was never home, and I never told the girl she couldn't go to tutoring. The counselor just went quiet for a few seconds, then said she appreciated the clarity and that she'd been getting mixed messages from multiple places. That was the first moment I realized my stepdaughter's little stories were probably bigger than I thought. Then, a couple days later, I ran into my husband's ex-wife's sister. I barely talked to her, so it took me a second to recognize her, and if I had known what she was about to tell me, I would have turned around and walked out of that store. She walked right up to me and told me she didn't want to be in the middle of anything, but she couldn't watch her sister ruin another family without saying something. She told me the ex has been planning to move to another state next year. She supposedly got a job offer out there, but she didn't want to deal with custody stuff, so she needed to show that my husband was unstable or uninvolved, enough for her to take their daughter full-time. Hearing that honestly made all the weird little interactions with the ex click into place. The sudden friendliness, the smug attitude, the way she kept popping up whenever things escalated. None of it was random. She needed a paper trail, and my husband basically gave it to her by throwing himself into that varsity insanity and ignoring everything else. I don't know if I felt angry or stupid or just exhausted hearing it. Probably all three. Because I've been sitting here taking the blame for ruining a kid's dream when apparently the kid and her mother were playing their own game the entire time. And then things got even worse at home. The stepdaughter showed up on Saturday, even though it wasn't her weekend with us. Husband had left early for some team volunteer thing, and I was getting the little ones ready for their activities. She walked in acting like she owned the place and told me she needed a ride to some team brunch. I told her I couldn't. Not because of punishment or anything dramatic, I genuinely had my hands full, and her father was supposed to be handling all her team stuff. She didn't like that answer. She stormed off upstairs, and I could already feel that tight, tired kind of dread forming in my chest because I've seen that attitude before. 10 minutes later, I heard something slam, and my youngest started crying. I went upstairs and found a picture frame shattered on the floor. My stepdaughter was sitting on the bed, acting like nothing happened. I asked her what she did, and she wouldn't look at me. A few hours later, when my husband finally came home, she made herself cry and told him I grabbed her arm and made her stay home all day. I don't know what broke in me at that moment. I wasn't even shocked. I just felt empty. My husband didn't ask me what happened. He didn't ask the younger kids. He just stared at me like I was the root of every problem in his life. I think that was the moment I realized I had nothing left to give him. Not trust, not explanations, not patience. Nothing. I told him I was done explaining myself and that we needed a meeting with everyone involved. He didn't want to do it at first. He said I was making things dramatic, but I told him he could either sit down with me, the ex, the counselor, and the coach, or he could stop pretending he wanted to fix anything. I guess the shock of hearing that from me snapped him into agreeing. The meeting was today, and it was honestly surreal. The coach didn't come in with his usual, "I'm running a Division I program" attitude. He actually looked irritated. He said the stepdaughter had been missing voluntary practices and exaggerating injuries. He said a few parents had complained she stirred up drama on group chats. He also said her varsity spot wasn't based purely on skill. An older girl was injured at the start of the season, and they needed someone to fill in quickly. Hearing that out loud made my husband deflate in a way I've never seen. He looked embarrassed, but I didn't feel bad for him. He created this situation. The ex tried to jump in and say she didn't understand why I was so against the girl's success. I didn't even react. I just sat there while she tried to paint herself as the reasonable parent. The counselor shut her down, saying the narratives coming from their daughter didn't match the actual facts and it was harming more than one household. By the time the meeting ended, my husband still couldn't look me in the eye. My stepdaughter wouldn't even acknowledge me. The ex walked out acting offended. The counselor gave me a sympathetic look. The coach just looked annoyed with the whole family. I don't know what the marriage looks like from here, but I know I'm not carrying the blame anymore. Final update. Everything came to a head 2 weekends ago. right after the meeting at the school where the coach finally laid out every truth I already knew. I don't know why hearing it from him hit my husband so hard. Maybe it's because that coach is basically his personal pope at this point. Maybe it's because he finally ran out of people to blame. Or maybe it's just the first time someone other than me held up a mirror and said, "You helped create this mess." When we got home from that meeting, he didn't follow me around the house the way he usually does. He didn't try to sit in the same room or hover in the kitchen. He just went straight to the guest room. I didn't hear him for hours. No footsteps, no lights turning on, nothing. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was this dull ache, like something inside me finally gave up trying to defend itself. The next morning, I came downstairs and found him sitting at the dining table with a notebook full of numbers, schedules, and plans. He had written out everything he'd missed: my younger kids' ceremonies, parent meetings, games, doctor appointments. He even had the costs of the team things he signed us up for without asking. He looked exhausted, not guilty, not defensive, just tired in a way that made it obvious he finally understood what he'd done, not just to me, but to our entire family. And for the first time in weeks, I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just this flatness. I think that's when I realized the problem wasn't the varsity team anymore. It was everything that came before it. The years of guilt he let his ex-wife twist into control, the way he always said yes to anything involving his daughter, even when it meant saying no to our household. The fact that the first time I asked him for balance, he treated it like a personal attack. He didn't say much that morning, just admitted what I already knew: that he lost sight of us, that he let guilt swallow him, and that he didn't know how to pull himself out. He told me he loved me, but even that landed like a fact instead of a feeling. Something he was stating, not something I felt. The next few days were basically quiet. The stepdaughter stayed at her mom's because she was still angry at everyone. From what I heard, the benching embarrassed her, and she decided I was the safest person to pin her feelings on. My younger kids didn't seem bothered by the silence. Honestly, they looked relieved to have their dad back at home instead of running around town for someone else's schedule. But the damage was already woven into our routine. They were polite with him, but there was a distance there, the kind kids pick up naturally when they've spent months watching a parent forget they exist. I think that's what broke him more than anything. Not losing varsity, not losing the coach's approval, losing the way his kids used to look at him. A few days later, he told me he wanted counseling. Not marriage counseling, not fix us, but counseling to learn how to set boundaries and stop letting guilt dictate his life. It wasn't some big emotional moment. He didn't follow it with promises or plans. He just said it quietly and matter-of-factly. I agreed because we still had to raise kids together, and I refused to keep living in a home where guilt was the third parent. The counselor he found was fine, neutral, patient, direct. She said all the things I expected: patterns, guilt cycles, learned behavior, co-parenting complications. She confirmed what I already knew about him trying to be everything he wasn't allowed to be years ago, and then pouring it all into one child as if she was the cure for every mistake he ever made. The counselor also made it very clear that I had been carrying a two-parent household mostly on my own. The sessions weren't awful, but they also didn't fix anything between us. They just made it clearer that the marriage we had before the varsity chaos wasn't coming back. Trust doesn't magically rebuild because someone suddenly wants to do better. Once you carry months of resentment in your chest, you can't just cough it out and walk away light. My stepdaughter barely comes around now. I don't chase her. I don't try to fix anything. I don't have the energy to rebuild something that wasn't very strong to begin with. She still thinks I ruined her season, even though the coach made the decision, not me. She avoids eye contact when she does show up for the occasional weekend. She sticks to her dad. She stays upstairs. It's not hostile, just awkward and tense.